about the importance of single windows, and for you, with so much experience in trade facilitation, can you explain why it's important for developing and developed countries?
Well, the single windows are actually a package of measures that put together a large number of trade facilitation measures in a way that it's easy for exporters and importers to access them, and in a way that increases the competitiveness of the implementing countries. For developing countries, I think it's especially important for several reasons. First of all, just from the standpoint of competitiveness, because we see this, for example, in the World Bank doing business rankings. If everyone is going forward, and if you don't go forward, then you fall back and lose competitiveness. But as I have mentioned before, it's also very important, and often people don't realize this, for trade between developing countries. Because someone yesterday gave me an example of someone from Morocco who went to another African country, and they purchased a can of sardines from Morocco, and that can of sardines had been exported from the UK. And it was more profitable for the Moroccan exporter to do this than to export directly to that country, because of the number of costs associated with procedures between the two countries, which is higher than between that country and the UK. And you frequently see this between developing countries, and especially when there's a high set of barriers and costs on the exporter side and a high set of barriers and costs on the importer side, then it's very frequently more expensive to export to your neighbor than it is to export to a developed country. At the same time, because of the high requirements for products in developed countries, it could be actually, in the end, if the procedural barriers were at the same level, much more profitable to have trade between the developing countries, in addition to, because of the procedural costs, because of the similarities between requirements for products, and because of reduced transport costs. And also, if you have a neighboring country, quite often you know someone in the neighboring country, and so there are more ties that facilitate trade.
So obviously that's a great example of why it's so important to push trade forward and make it easier. What help is there available for developing countries in terms of financial or technical or expert or experience advice that can help them set up such a system?
Well, the establishment of single windows and the implementation of trade facilitation is part of the World Trade Organization's WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, which is expected to go into force either at the end of this year or at the beginning of next year. This will obligate all countries to eventually put in place single windows and to implement a range of trade facilitation measures. This WTO agreement, unlike any other agreement in the past, has special and differentiated treatment for developing countries. What does this mean? This means that a developing country, if they define their needs, they can ask to have additional time for implementation, but they can also ask to have financial assistance or assistance in the form of training for the implementation of trade facilitation measures. And many donor countries have made this a priority in their technical assistance programs. And even for those countries that have difficulty identifying donors, there's a way to obtain assistance, because the WTO has established a WTO trade facilitation facility, and a country, once it has defined its needs, once it is gone and done its, made a best effort to identify donors. If they don't identify a donor, they can go to the WTO Trade Facilitation Facility, and it has its own funds, which its board can assign to projects to help countries implement.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.